I got this jewelry box from the thrift store for only $6. I couldn't believe it. It was such a good deal. I'm going to show you how I am going to transform it and use it in my craft space. I'm so excited to share this with you. Let's get started. There's a few ways you can prep the surface of your jewelry box if you find one, which I see them at the thrift stores quite often. Just an FYI for you. I'm going to wipe mine down with some rubbing alcohol and a rag, but you can sand this down first, depending on what type of paint you are going to be using. Today I'm using some chalk acrylic paint by Decor in the color Whisper. Now this is my absolutely favorite color of chalk paint. I usually prep my surfaces using some gesso first, but this time around I decided to try it out without the gesso. And just so you know, in case you're wondering, gesso is a primer, so you could use any primer that you have on hand. But I wanted to see if I could do this just with the chalk paint. Now, it did end up taking a total of 3 coats. Probably could have used 4, but I was able to get away with just 3 coats because of the special technique that I am going to be doing to this piece. So the reason why I only went with the chalk paint was because I wanted to distress it. And with having a primer such as gesso, it helps the paint to really adhere to the surface. And you can't distress if the paint is really gripping on tight. There's a lot of times I have seen furniture pieces that are not finished on the inside. And for some reason, I'm just not crazy about that look. I like it to be finished on the inside as well, so I painted that. While the first coat was drying on the main piece, I am now going to first attempt at removing the lining. This lining is old and dingy, smelly, dirty. It was gross. I had forgot that there is a technique on making it way easier to remove stuff like this. And I attempted to just use my knife, and then you can see I wet it down and I'm using my putty knife to try and scrape it off. And I'm telling you, I was really struggling. I took my finger and I was rubbing off the adhesive and paper because I had soaked it. But when I was soaking it with water, it started to affect the wood. So I'm like, okay, this is not working. And then light bulb moment. I remembered a viewer told me to heat it up. So I dug out my blow dryer and I started to heat up the second drawer to loosen up the adhesive, and it worked way better. So I can't remember who suggested it to me. I think, you know what, it could have been a few viewers for all I can remember. But I wanted to say a big thank you for a tip like that because it really did work way better. You can see how that popped right off. So I'm just going to continue to work around the edge of the lining with a thin blade. And in spots, it didn't completely remove the backing, like the paper and the glue, but it was way better than what I was doing before. So I was really happy with this. So you can see here how there's still quite a bit of the paper on the bottom, but I was able to get in there with my blow dryer and my knife and peel up majority of that paper. Now I am going to be covering this, so if I don't get everything removed, that is okay, but I wanted to try and get most of it removed so then I could create as level of a surface as possible. That's just personal preference, but of course feel free to do whatever you have or use whatever you have or whatever techniques you know. Okay, so my first coat of chalk paint is all dry. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to be giving it a second coat. Now, just so you know, I am using a soft bristled brush. I'm trying to get nice smooth brush strokes. So I'm just going to go ahead and work on this. Again, trying to create those nice smooth brush strokes. And I am going to be just giving 2 coats of paint on the interior of the jewelry box. Okay, so now that that's drying, I'm back to my drawers and I decided to sand them down. That way here, that will create a nice smooth surface for me to work with. And I was able to remove any of the loose debris that was hanging around in there. And I would just continue to work on this until I was happy with the results. I did make sure I got the bottom as well. And you can still see how much paper was left behind. But at this point, it was not going to affect my project anymore. I'm just making sure too that I clean it out really well because I am going to be using some adhesive. And if I don't have that all nice and clean, the adhesive's not going to work quite as well, or there could perhaps be lumps and bumps. So I discovered that the drawer pulls were only tacked down with some finishing nails. I thought they were screwed in, but you can see these are pulling up just fine. But I will show you later on, it actually ends up becoming kind of tricky when I try to put them back on. Okay, so back to my drawers, or the interior of my drawers. I am measuring out the size of my drawers and I'm going to be cutting some paper down. Now, I made a mistake originally. I had just measured out one drawer and I got the dimensions of the paper that I needed cut down. And I found out that actually one of the other drawers is a little bit bigger. I don't know how I missed it, but I did. So when I went to attempt to line all my drawers, I had one piece that was just too small. But this one, it worked really well. And then I also made sure I cut some pieces down to fit the sides as well. Before I glue my paper into place, I decided that I would paint the drawers. So I am using a brush that's a little bit stiffer here because I had a lot of grooves to get into. But again, I didn't use gesso, a primer, and I did not sand it down. I decided to go straight in with my chalk paint again and just gave it 3 coats. And I was making sure I was getting it right into all those grooves. And I also did the top edge of the drawer and anywhere there would be some natural wood showing. I had originally wanted to strip this down, but as I was looking at it closer, I discovered that the wood was all uneven and the original wood color wasn't quite what I wanted, so I decided that I would paint it. And I have to say I am quite happy with how this has turned out. So this is 3 coats of the chalk paint on the exterior and 2 on the interior. Now you can see I'm just using some fine grit sanding paper and I'm distressing the edges. Now because I didn't gesso it, I was able to scrape it off really easily. I know some people like to sand their pieces first before applying the chalk paint or any type of paint, but I admit I was just being lazy here and I knew I would be sealing this all up so I wouldn't have to worry about it as much. And truth be told, if the paint does chip off, I think it would just add to the distressed look of the piece. So I'm going around just concentrating on the edges, anywhere that a piece would naturally wear down. That's where I was focusing all my distressing. Once you're happy with that, use a rag and clean it all up because we need to seal it up at this point, and I didn't want any of that dust getting mixed in with my sealant. I'm going to be using DecoArt's matte varnish. I really like this varnish. It goes a long ways and I really like the finish that it creates. So again, I'm using a soft bristled brush and I'm making sure I'm covering the whole piece. But what this does is it helps the distress marks really pop, and you'll see how it looks here. It just really makes a difference. The other reason why I'm doing this is because I wanted to add another extra layer, and the layer I'm going to be adding on top here would end up soaking too much into the chalk paint, and I did not want that to happen. I'm using Distress Oxide Frayed Burlap ink, and I'm going to use a sponge applicator, makeup applicator, and I'm going to apply that into all the crevices. I'm also making sure I'm focusing on the distress marks to create a nice earthy, grungy look. I love this technique. It works really well. Another way you could do this is by using some gel stain, gel wood stain. That works really, really well. But the stain that I had on hand was a little too dark for what I wanted, so I decided to use the Frayed Burlap Distress Oxide ink pad. Keep in mind, this is a water-based product, so you are going to have to seal it up afterwards. But if you make a mistake, it's really easy to clean up by just spritzing some water on a rag and wiping it off and then going over it again. It works really well and it's quite forgiving, like I said, because you can clean up a mistake. So I'm just going to continue to work on the surface to create a nice earthy, grungy look until I am happy until I'm happy with how it looks. Just another tip too, I'm focusing on where dirt would gather up in all those little crevices and on worn corners and whatnot. So you can do that as well. And I'm just going in, adding some ink directly to my rag and spreading that around. I just thought it helped to kind of tone down the brightness of that chalk paint that we had. So my drawers are all dry now too. I am going to go ahead and distress those just the same way, using my sanding paper, cleaning the surface, and then I will be going over this as well with the Distress Oxide ink. So now you want to seal it up with a matte clear spray or a varnish again, and that will help to protect all that distressing that we did as well as your paint. I'm going to now put the drawer pulls back in place, and I accidentally painted the holes over, and I should have poked the paint or removed the paint out of the holes as I went along, but I didn't. So now I was trying to figure out where those were. Use the nail to poke those again. And now this is where I had a little bit of a struggle. So I started off by putting the drawer pulls and the nails into place, but the nails were so small that I kind of struggled with getting them back into place. So I did manage here, but I do end up using some needle nose pliers to help me hold on to those, and it helped me prevent from hammering my fingers because I did a few times, and yeah, it hurt. So here you see me using the needle nose pliers to help hold the nail into place while I hammer. So I could have probably glued these into place, or perhaps maybe found some little screws that fit, but I was just making do with what I had. Now that it's all done, it's time to put the drawers into place, and this is what I'm using it for. So I had pressed and dried some leaves, some fern leaves, some ivy leaves, and I just had them in this plain old container. They were sitting off in a dark space. I wasn't using them as much as I had wanted to. So when I saw this piece in the thrift store, I'm like, I wanted to use this to store my dried leaves and dried flowers. So that's exactly what I'm doing. And I have to say, I'm so happy with how this is working. So I could layer it with maybe some parchment paper or some acetate in between all the pieces to help to keep them separated, but I kind of think it's fun just to mix it all up. And here I just dumped all my pressed flowers and petals in here. I just thought it looked so pretty, just scattered throughout the drawer, and you can take those right out and pick what you like. But I have to say, I'm so happy with how this turned out. Let me know what you think down below. I have another jewelry box that I had transformed, and let me tell you, it is spectacular. You'll want to check that out right here. We will see you over there. Thanks for joining me today. Take care. Bye.